Management of ABC Private Limited has decided to make a web application for their customers. So the management calls the web development team, which is led by James. You can see James here. Okay, so the team of 4: James, Rocky, Arjun and Lina. So James is leading the meeting. Team, there is an urgent requirement, so I called you here. One of our customers needs us to build an application for them. We have very less time and the customer wants the application to be up and running before Christmas. Do you guys have any idea how can we go about with this? Because if we start making the application by the usual way, it will take a lot of time. Yeah. Then I have also seen in our previous projects, there were a lot of codes that did not do anything. We want something fast and efficient. So this the code that did not do anything part is James was talking about non-functional requirements. So one of the team members has suggested to go with Spring framework. Rocky says, Rocky, can you tell us more about Spring? How it matches our requirement? Because as Rocky suggested to go with Spring, so the other team member is curious to know about why he opted for Spring framework. Then Rocky started explaining. Spring is a well-established framework with lots of features that helps the developers to work on their application rather than worrying about non-functional code. So being an end developer, you can focus on what is required to deliver instead of, in order to deliver the required things, what are the non-functional requirements that you need to satisfy. Okay, so that you can get rid of when you go for any framework like Spring. It also increases developers' productivity and reduces the application development time, because most of the things are already offered by the framework related to non-functional requirements. As you are focusing on only functional requirements, so it obviously results in better application development. Yeah. So he's Mr. Rod Johnson started Spring Source Company and developed Spring Framework for Apache 2.0 in June 2003. The Spring Framework is an open source application framework and inversion of control container for the Java platform. It provides comprehensive infrastructure support for developing Java applications. Spring handles the infrastructure so we can focus on our application. So all the infrastructure related stuff will be handled by the framework called Spring, and we can focus only on our business. What is the meaning of non-functional requirement? So basically, non-functional requirements are not the requirements that we do or the features that we develop. Usually non-functional requirements could be, for example, if you take Flipkart's 1 billion sale. So if you recall that stuff, there were lakhs of people, lakhs of users were accessing Flipkart at a time. So here the non-functional requirement would be, it should handle lakhs of user sessions. So that is a non-functional requirement. What is a functional requirement here? When I select an item to the cart and when I want to purchase that item, when I want to place an order with respect to that item, that would be a functional requirement. And here the non-functional requirement would be handling 1 lakh sessions. Next. Why Spring? because there are a number of other frameworks available in the market. So why should I go for Spring? So Spring is a framework like Struts and Hibernate. Spring is famous in the industry. The learners should focus on learning more of Spring compared to other technologies now. Spring and Hibernate are extremely popular and widely used in the industry. Spring framework is lightweight as it does not involve installation, startup and stop activities associated with a container. Okay, so first statement is it is same as the other frameworks like Struts and Hibernate. So it is same in the context that it is a framework and it is more than what Struts and Hibernate. Okay, how we will see in our sessions. And now Spring has become the de facto standard for web application development with respect to an enterprise. Okay, next, learners should focus on learning Spring. Why? Because we have a classic example within our session itself. What is that? Siddiqui has asked, can we cover Spring with Hadoop integration? So what I want to relate here is Hadoop is a new technology and Spring as a framework has an integration layer with Hadoop directly. And we have several NoSQL databases which were evolving recently. Okay, so we have integration with those NoSQL databases also. For example, MongoDB, which is currently very good at market, and Spring has an integration layer with MongoDB also. So what does it mean? Being a framework, if any new technology comes into the market and if it supports integration with that framework, then we can easily adopt to any technology and we can get all the new technologies into your project, and even after including all those technologies into your project, still they are maintainable. Still they are maintainable. This was missing with Struts. So mostly it used to deal with taglibs as well as the other very limited set of frameworks. But compared to Spring, we cannot compare both because we cannot compare with respect to performance, or we cannot compare with respect to the number of integrations it has. Okay, Struts is very good till some extent, but if you are going beyond enterprise level application, preferable is Spring. Okay, next. So Spring, it will come with its own container that we will talk about in our next slides. So usually, if you are aware of servlets and JSPs, so what we will do in servlets and JSPs, if we develop a web application using servlets and JSPs, we need a web container which is assumed Tomcat, and we need a servlet container because web container already has that. So in order to deal with servlets and JSPs, we need to have a web server, and along with it has to have a servlet container. Okay, so if you want to perform any request on your web application, so your container should be up and running, and if you do any modifications to your piece of code, then your web server has to be restarted. Okay, next, in case of Spring, we have two paths. The first path is we can use Spring framework for developing core Java applications where we do not require any container, and we can use Spring for developing web applications. So in order to leverage the web technologies like request response and all, So we need a web server or an application server, but creation of beans and manipulation of beans and mapping the requests and everything will be done using the configuration files with the support of IOC container. So we will see more in coming slides. Java frameworks. In Java technology, there are so many frameworks that help the programmers to build complex applications easily. We can choose these frameworks for building our applications. For example, Hibernate we can use for database access mechanism. So basically, Hibernate is on top of a concept called ORM, Object Relational Mapping. Okay, so with the concept of ORM, what is the ultimate goal that we are achieving? We can talk to POJOs instead of firing SQL queries with respect to each database. So when we can map our class with a relation at relational database management system, so from then we can directly speak to POJO rather than speaking to the underlying relation. So with this change of database we can do on the fly with minimal changes. Okay. Next, struts. As you know, we use struts framework for web application development. EJBs, services like transaction security and messaging. EJB has the inbuilt support for all this stuff. So that is why EJB was very famous. But nowadays, with the speed the Spring is growing, I could say that EJBs is outdated because of the performance reasons also that was decided. And log4j, you might be knowing about it or not. I'll tell you. So log4j is a framework for logging. What is the importance of logging? So using logging, many a times a developer can know, for example, if an exception occurs during while you are accessing any of the resource on your web application, so you can directly go to the logs and you can verify what exactly went wrong. You cannot ask the user, you can ask the user to reproduce the problem by asking the steps to reproduce it. But using logs only, you can verify where exactly it went wrong and you can rectify that. Let us talk about a problem. Applications that use these varied frameworks and services become difficult to maintain as it grows, including testing effort. So what is the need? Applications that use a number of frameworks and the services have to remain maintainable. Yes, when it has an integration layer with all the services, then it is maintainable. Codes should be loosely coupled with the frameworks so that testing and reusability becomes easy. So this is where dependency injection comes. So whatever the dependent classes are there, we will not be initializing those along with the code which is using them. Rather, we will inject them. Okay, so that it is completely decoupled and it is very easy to write JUnit test cases for those. So what do you mean by what I mean by JUnit test cases? JUnit is a unit testing framework for Java, where using which you can test a piece of code, a unit of code, whether it is working as expectedly or not by passing some inputs, and you can expect the output also. So when your input and output results as per your expectation, then that piece of code is working. So that is how your JUnit framework evaluates your unit of code. Next, Spring Framework provides a lightweight solution to develop maintainable and reusable enterprise applications. So what is this lightweight? We will talk about. It provides very simple and rich facilities to integrate various frameworks, technologies and services in the application. So as I already covered, so we can integrate n number of services along with your Spring as it has an integration layer. So it would be very easy to maintain. Next, Spring simplifies Java development. How? To back up its attack on Java complexity, Spring employs 4 key strategies. Lightweight and minimally invasive development with plain old Java objects. We usually call them as POJOs. POJOs means a class with some attributes or some data members associated with either constructors or setter and getter methods, and which will not extend or implement any of the framework related classes or interfaces. That is what we call a plain old Java object. Loose coupling through dependency injection and interface orientation. What does it mean? So for example, I have a user as well as I have a car class. So based on user's specification, a car has to be built and that object of that car has to be returned. But if I write that piece of code along with the user, then it is tightly coupled. Instead, what I could do is I can pass user requirements. Okay, so this what we call the creation of car object can be outsourced to the IOC container, so that user will be having a user as a class will have a setter method for which container will provide an instance of car. So here car is an interface, and i10, BMW, i20 and all these are implementation of car interface. So now user as a class will have only interfaces which will be injected by the container. What I was talking about. Let us halt for a second now. Yeah. I have a class user. Okay. And I have a interface car. So usually based on users preferences, I would be creating an instance of car within the user class itself. What I mean, for example, void build a car. It's a method assume. So which will contain car instance, and here I would say that car equal to new, for example, i20 and car dot whatever the associated methods. Okay, so I would be setting info related to i20 here. Okay, so this is how usually we can think of a user and a car instances. But here, as the installation or as the initialization or the creation of car object is done inside user object. What does it mean? Now user and car are tightly coupled, and this logic I no need to worry about, right? For example, somebody is developing a car interface in your team and somebody is developing a user class. So what, in order to do the parallel development, one can focus on interface development and one can focus on class development. And one can say that, boss, assume you will be providing an instance of car. With that assumption, go with your business logic. So if that is a contract, then being a developer of class user, he is no need to worry about how exactly car instance is created and what are the properties associated with that car. This is abstracted out of the user class developer. Okay, so how this can be achieved? This can be achieved in this way. For example, instead of this, I would be having a setter method. For example, void set car, and here it would be having an instance of car. So here I would use this dot car equal to car. Okay, and here I no need to initialize my car instance. Instead, as this setter method is being invoked by some third party, in our case it is a container, which is supplying me the expected instance of car. So the instance could be, for example, class I20 implements car interface. So it could be an instance of I20, or it could be an instance of BMW, or it could be anything else. Okay, so this would be configuration driven. Okay, so because of this approach, now car is loosely coupled with user. Okay, so because of I am not creating an instance of car inside user. We will have some other slides on the same topic. We will focus more. Yeah, very good. So we have few questions from Vijay. Vijay says, is it also true in production environment that we do not need to install web application server? Yeah. So in order to leverage the web features, we need to have a web container. So as I said in one of our slides, there are two paths when you are developing core Java application using Spring framework. You do not require to have any web server or application server. But when you are developing a web application using Spring framework, there you require a web server or application server, but the instance, the creation of objects are done by IOC container only, not by your servlet container. That difference you need to understand. Usually, the instances of servlets would be created by your servlet container, right? In your web application. But here, the instances of beans would be created and injected by an IOC container. Okay. So here also in web application also, as if you want to qualify your application as web, so it has to be deployed in any of the web server or application server. But the creation and what we call injection logic is no way dependent on your web server or app server. That will be taken care by an inbuilt container. We call it as IOC container. We will talk about IOC container, then you will be cleared about it. Yeah, and Vijay also says that, so far whatever we discussed, like that has to be injected. So can't we achieve this factory pattern? So some of you might be knowing about factory pattern. So what Vijay is talking about is, for example, I would be having a class with a method called getCarInstance, which accepts a string. If you pass I20 as the value, then it will create an instance of I20 implementation and it will return that object. So we were talking more of this, right? So that is what Vijay's question. But here there is a difference. Here you need to call that factory method to give you the instance. But in IOC, you no need to call. It will be injected without you call it. That is what inversion. So we are moving in a reverse direction, right? Usually you have to call to get something. Here you don't call, we will call. That is what IOC. So when you configure it, it will be injected without you call it. So that is the difference between your factories and IOC. And the other difference would be you will be end up in developing factory classes as and when you need. So again, this is a non-functional requirement, right? So we can develop a factory pattern, but if you need to develop it, you need to develop it for a number of cases. Again, it is a non-functional requirement, which you are getting it from your Spring framework. Okay. Next. So this loose coupling through dependency injection and interface orientation. Declarative programming through aspects and common conventions. So what is this aspect and all? We have few other slides I will discuss at that time. Then boilerplate reduction through aspects and templates. So basically the last 2 points are talking about AOP, aspect-oriented programming, which targets at cross-cutting concerns. What I mean by cross-cutting concerns? Logging could be a cross-cutting concern, security could be a cross-cutting concern, transaction management and applying business rules, and there are so many other cross-cutting concerns you can think of with respect to an application development. So all these cross-cutting concerns can be addressed using AOP. Can we have a basic example to understand this? Sure. For example, I have a class, some hello, and it has a method called void say hello. Now I want to calculate the time taken by this method to execute this piece of code. So what I can do, I can collect the start time here, and I can take that end time here, and I can calculate it by end time minus start time. Okay, so this is my logic assume I can go for. So in this case, if I want to perform this activity for all the methods in my application, in all my classes, then you have to write this logic in all the methods, right? So what I can treat now is I can extract this as a concern out of my method, and I can write it only one time, and I can say that boss, execute this piece of code just when I enter into a method, and execute this piece of code just before when I exit from a method. So if you write this logic in as a concern or as an aspect, then this can be applicable to all your methods across all your classes. So this is what I feel it as a cross-cutting concern. I don't need to repeat the logic. I can write it for one time, and which can be executed on demand. So when a method is entered, that piece of code will be executed as I have configured it. Got my point? So this is what we achieve using AOP, aspect oriented programming.